It's on the pew behind you.
You right beside you. Behind you. Look down. Pick it up.
Very precise instructions. I would like to thank the saints here in Vichy for their wonderful hospitality. The food has been wonderful, delicious, nutritious. The hospitality and the facilities have been beautiful. This is a wonderful place, and I really, really enjoy this place with my wonderful wife. As we stand, we want to pray. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be found acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. As we open our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6. Can somebody read it for me, please? Proverbs 27, verse 6.
Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful.
Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Imagine you have an issue with a brother or a sister. He or she has done something you feel is inappropriate. It may be a broken promise. It may be some bad behavior. But you feel you need to deal with it. You need to confront it. You need to confront that person. But the issue is sensitive. It is thorny. It is delicate. And you shudder at the idea of bringing it up for fear that it might make matters even worse. My question for you is, what should you do? What would you do? Thank you. Do you take the risk and rock the boat, hoping it doesn't blow up in your face? Or do you look the other way, hoping and praying that somehow the issue will fix itself up? Maybe it's something that it affects you directly. Do you just suck it up and resign yourself to a suboptimal existence? What would you do? Yes, of course, we know that in theory we should take courage, be strong in the Lord, and face the issue. But honestly, hasn't it happened to you, as it has happened to me, that more often than not, we choose to remain silent? This has happened to me more times than I care to admit. And that's why this morning I want to address the topic, how to successfully initiate a crucial confrontation in the church. How to successfully initiate a crucial confrontation in the church. Let's begin with a definition. What is a crucial confrontation? A crucial confrontation is a face-to-face accountability discussion on something that matters. Someone has disappointed you, and you need to talk to him directly. Him or her directly. Like when Joshua confronted Achan, Samuel confronted Saul, Nathan confronted David, Peter confronted Ananias and Sapphira, Paul confronted Peter. In every one of these instances, there was an issue that was delicate that need to be dealt with. Now, Why is it important to have crucial confrontations? Because at the heart of most family, team, and organizational chronic problems lies the inability to hold those crucial confrontations. If you peel back the layers, at the center you will find an issue that has either not been dealt with or has not been dealt with well. For example, Brother Brennan mentioned the other night in his message on the dry bones that some congregations allowed ministers with no anointing or calling to take charge. Yeah. Did I get that right, Brother Brennan?
You're right.
Yeah. Now that's quite an indictment. Do you think that will cause problems in the church? Of course. So I asked, has the issue been dealt with? And he answered me that to his knowledge, it has not been dealt with. And you know why? Because most of us have learned to handle conflict in one of two ways. Silent or violent. Right. Flight or fight. Passive or aggressive. And most of us tend to go silent. We avoid the issue by looking the other way or withdrawing. Others go violent. They attack. They lash back. They raise their voice. They threaten. They intimidate. And then they feel repentant for how they acted. Unfortunately, there's a very, very high price you pay when you handle conflict with either silence or violence. In terms of the relationships and performance. On the relationship side, you have a culture of low morale, low trust, where relationships are estranged, formal, and distant. On the performance side, results are dismal, goals are not achieved, and the mission becomes unfocused and fuzzy. Now, before I go on, let me tell you something about myself. If you're one of those who tend to avoid conflict and confrontation altogether, welcome to the club. I mean, I'm one of those that mix with conflict like water mixes with oil. I don't like conflict at all. But unfortunately, most of the time, I avoid conflict by just giving in. And then I read in the Bible, Galatians 1:10, that says, if I still try to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. I also read elsewhere that people pleasing can only get you so far. And that non-confronters leave a lot of success on the table and a lot of messes in their wake. I also learned that they can easily be made suckers by evil people. So I came to understand that if I'm going to successfully fulfill my God-given mission, I would have to learn and stand up and say, no, I will not go along with that. I will not participate in that. Smiling, but firmly. So, I'm not coming to you as the expert on conflict management, but rather as a fellow brother. A brother who has a problem. And in learning to deal with that problem, have discovered a few things that work and some things that don't. And I want to share with you my experience. I want to share with you some practices based on scriptural principles that can help you successfully deal with conflict and confrontation. The good news is that we don't have to be limited to the false dichotomy of choosing between silence or violence. We don't have to choose between being passive and aggressive. There's an alternative. Thank God there's an alternative. We can learn to handle conflict assertively. And when done well, the problem is solved and the relationships are strengthened. You see, strong and healthy relationships are not those where there's an absence of conflict, but rather where they have learned to handle conflict well.
All right, brother, that's good.
Including the church. You see, wherever two or more people live or work together, interpersonal problems will emerge. Our ability to prevent and solve those problems largely depend on how well we hold one another accountable. I think it was Brother John was mentioning that yesterday, that we need to hold ourselves accountable. In fact, as we will see in this message, being able to bring up problems when they are detected is a major marker between healthy and unhealthy organizations, including the church. So that means that although the focus of this message is going to be the context of the church, the principles we're going to see can be applied to any interpersonal relationship. I mean, the only ones who don't need this are the hermits, or if you live in a cave or something, this message is not for you. But if you have any relationship with other human beings, be it at the home with your husband or wife, with your children, the boss employee, friends and neighbors, this message can be applied. And this means that you can leave here with something you can begin to start applying right away. Now, I don't pretend to have some new insight or earth-shattering revelation. Maybe you feel, as I do, that the problem is not so much knowing I should confront a brother or a sister. It's knowing how to do it in such a way that solves the issue without jeopardizing the relationship. So rather than a sermon or an exhortation, I want to make this a dialogue. I'm teaching rather than preaching, if you want to see it that way. So please feel free to ask questions. I want to make this as practical for you as I can, for your situation. The outline of this message is very simple. Let's go back to the scenario I posed at the beginning. You have an issue with a brother or sister, and you feel you must confront that person. I want to outline this message with the 3 steps that you can successfully take to handle that confrontation. Step number 1, what to do before the confrontation. Step number 2, what to do during the confrontation. And step number 3, what to do after the confrontation. Simple. Before, during, and after. So let's begin. Somebody please get Matthew chapter 7, verse 5 for me, please. Matthew 7, 5. Who's going to read it for me? Thank you, Brother Forrest. And then Matthew 18, 15, please. Matthew 18, 15. Who's going to read it? Someone else? Yes, Brother David. And then James chapter 5, verse 19 and 20. James chapter 5, verse 19, someone? Yes, thank you. Matthew 7, 5, please.
Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote of thy brother's eye. Cast the mote out of thy brother's eye.
Thank you. Anyone who has had an accountability discussion realizes that the first 30 seconds of the interaction sets the tone for everything else. The first, you only have a sentence or two to establish the climate of the conversation. If you set the tone wrong, it is difficult to turn things around later on. So a bad beginning almost might ensure a bad ending. So the first 30 seconds are crucial. In Panama, we have the expression, vino con dos piedras en la mano. He came with 2 hands in his hand, 2 stones in his hand, meaning that he approached the issue with an aggressive stance. You want to avoid that at all costs. Amen. Why? Because the other person is going to become defensive. And if he becomes defensive, he's not going to listen to anything you're going to say. And the issue is going to go nowhere, at least nowhere healthy. Now, actually, the first 30 seconds don't determine the climate. Actually, it only makes it visible. The tone is established before you even start the conversation in your preparation. That's why of the 3 steps, this first one, the preparation, what you do before the confrontation, is by far the most important. That's why, you see, you need to deal with your own issues first. That's why Jesus said to take the plank out of your own eye first. You see, you need to make sure you come in with the right frame of mind. And that's why you should never, ever initiate a confrontation while you're angry. Your emotions will get in the way. You see, sometimes we're like the young boy who refused to see his role in an argument by explaining to his mother, "It all started when he hit me back." So, to prepare yourself, you want to ask yourself these 3 key questions. We're talking about the preparation before, everything, what you're going to do before the confrontation. Question number 1, what do I want to achieve? What is my intent? Ideally, you should aim at achieving 2 things: solve the problem and strengthen the relationship. Who has Matthew 18:15? I think it was Brother David, yes?
Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee,
If he hear you,
thou hast gained thy brother.
thou has what? Gained your brother. You need to check your motivation. Your goal is not to win the discussion. Your goal is not to prove you are right. Your goal is not to get even, to punish, to blame, or to put him or her in his place. Your goal is to win your brother. And winning in this context means to gain him, to get him on your side. You're looking out for his benefit. It's not about you. It's about the issue and the other person. Who has James chapter 5, verse 19, brother?
Brother, if any of you can err in the truth and one convert,
Go on until verse 20. Let him who knows
that he which converteth the sinner from the error
of his way
shall
save a soul from death.
and hide a multitude.
That's the intent. Cover a multitude of sins and save a sinner from death. Now, the intent you want to communicate is that you're willing to tell the truth, even if it causes short-term pain, in order to get long-term gain. Let me repeat that. Your intent, what you're looking for, is to communicate that you're willing to tell the truth, even if it hurts, because you're willing to cause a short-term pain in order to get a long-term gain. Does that make sense? Now, there's a phrase that nicely sums this up. You want to go hard on the issue, soft on the person. Hard on the issue, soft on the person. Confronting means you turn your face towards the problem. It's not you against me, it's you and I against the problem. The enemy is the problem, not the other person. So you want to deal with the issue in such a way that preserves the relationship, but at the same time deals with the issue. Our Lord Jesus modeled this beautifully for us in the story of the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 8. Clearly, there was a problem that needed to be dealt with. Needed to be confronted. This woman had sinned. She was caught red-handed. But contrary to the bloodthirsty Pharisees, Jesus solved the matter by confronting the issue while at the same time saving her dignity as a person. He said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Now notice, he didn't sugarcoat the issue. He dealt with it. He told her the truth. He was hard on the issue, but he was soft on the person.
Amen.
He said, "Neither do I condemn you." And notice he extended grace first and then raised the standard. Go and sin no more. We often do it the other way around. We demand the high standard and maybe offer grace. But remember, the goal is to succeed at both. Solve the issue and strengthen the relationship. You see, it's relatively easy to find a nice brother or sister who creates warm and lasting relationships, but who struggles to challenge things that need to be challenged, they need to deal with. And it's not much more harder to find a no-nonsense, hard-hitting leader who can put out a fire and solve an issue, but who creates a lot of hard feelings. The challenge for you and me is for us to be able to hold others accountable in a manner that not only solves a problem, but improves the relationship. Now, we need to be clear on something. Achieving that goal, or those goals, won't always be possible because it also depends on the other person. The point is that your goal as you approach the confrontation is both solve the issue and strengthen the relationship. So that was question number 1. Question number 2, as we prepare, we're still in the preparation phase. Is it worth it? Is it worth bringing this issue up? The decision to whether or not bring up an issue involves balancing the rewards against the price of addressing the issue. And that balance is unique to every situation. Now, having said that, please don't make the mistake of confusing the perceived difficulty of bringing up the issue with the determination of whether or not it is appropriate to do so. For example, don't say, talking to brother so-and-so on that issue is going to be a pain in the neck. Rather, ask yourself, what will be the long-term consequences of not confronting brother so-and-so? You see the difference? It's like finding a tube of rancid cottage cheese in the fridge. You smell it, and then you put it on a table for a few days in the sun, and then you come back to it a few days later. Is it going to taste bitter? Of course not. So the guideline, I would say, is this. If it's a minor issue, and you can ignore it without wondering if it will pop up later on, then sure, drop it. But if it is an issue that's going to create greater problems down the line, then deal with it now.
Right. Amen.
Let me share you a few examples of when it is imperative to speak up. You need to speak up when we're talking about sin. I mean, our love for our brother should never, ever allow us to be silent in the face of something that's clearly wrong in the sight of God. Amen. In the dining room, there's a picture of the young people. It seems like a picture that was dedicated to the leader. I don't know if it was Brother Clarence. But it's a picture of the young people, and on the margins they have written a few dedications to him. And one of the young people wrote, "You love us enough to tell us when we are wrong." That's what we're talking about. If you see something that is clearly wrong, clearly needs to be dealt with, don't look the other way. Your love for the other brother and your love for God should not allow you to just look the other way. You need to deal with it. You need to speak up. You also need to speak up when it's clearly a broken promise. If a brother promised you to pay back by a certain time and he did not do so, and he gave you no explanation whatsoever, there's an issue you need to deal with. You need to speak up also when you're acting out your feelings. You see, if something is bugging you, you're not going to do a good job by hiding it. It's going to show up in different ways, and usually unhealthy ways. If you don't talk it out, you're going to act it out. Okay. So instead of dropping hints, speak up. You also need to speak up when your conscience is nagging you. Sometimes you keep telling yourself, it's nothing. But deep down in your gut, you know you need to speak up. Don't ignore that voice. Take that internal prodding as a sign that your silence isn't warranted. You also need to speak up when there's a pattern of abuse. If you see an infraction and say nothing, then the other person can easily conclude it's okay, nothing, no big deal. And then when you realize that you've given the green light, it's even harder to speak up later on. So speak up now. You also need to speak up when the rights of a whole group are being affected by the individual. You see, as a society, be it a family, an organization, a company, or a church, one of the defining dynamic tensions is that of tension between the rights of an individual versus the rights of the whole group. If you see a person that is imposing his rights on the rights of the rest, then you need to speak up and say, brother so-and-so, what you're doing, I need to talk to you about this. So, we have question number 1. What is my intent? What is my aim? Question number 2, is it worth dealing with this issue? We're still in the preparation phase. Question number 3, why would a reasonable person act like that? I found a very interesting verse in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17. Let's look it up, please. Leviticus 19, 17. Somebody read it for me, please.
Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor and not suffer sin upon him.
Okay. The word rebuke or reprove used in the English Bible, in our Spanish Bible it says reason. So I looked it up and I found a very, the Spanish version explains more clearly the context or the intended meaning in the Hebrew. The idea is this, or let me read it how it would be in another translation. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur in sin. The concept is this. When we perceive a violation, when we perceive a violation, our first thought is to assume that the other person is motivated to do it and to act that way. And we jump to conclusions. We might even go as far as to thinking that he actually enjoys doing what he's doing. And that is a mistake, a huge mistake. The best thing you can do is give the other person the benefit of the doubt. And let me give you an illustration of the power of doing so. During my first year as a math teacher, I was working in a Jewish school. And one of the things I love about the Jewish culture are the stories. And one of the rabbis told this interesting story. He said that he was, well, not he, but somebody was traveling a very long trip from New York all the way to Jerusalem, 14-hour trip or something like that. And he was taking his 3-year-old son on that trip. And after the plane took off and they reached cruising altitude, the kid got bored, so he loosened his seatbelt and he started walking around. And unfortunately, while he was doing that, he was bothering the other passengers. And all the while, the father was just looking aimlessly out the window. So finally, one of the other passengers got fed up and called the flight attendant and says, "Talk to the father and let him know the kid is bothering." So the flight attendant politely approaches the sir and says, touches on the shoulder and says, "Excuse me, sir, can you have your son seated? He's disturbing the other passengers." And the father kind of wakes up and says, yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, you're right. When my wife and I decided to make this trip, and the flight attendant said, "Your wife? Where's your wife?" "She's in the luggage compartment in a casket. She died last week, and I'm taking her to Israel to bury her, and I don't know how to break it to the kid." Now, my question is, for you, do you see that situation differently? Of course. Doesn't that little piece of information help you see, understand the attitude of the father in a different light? After that, the other passengers even played with the kid because they could see the situation in a different light. That's the power of giving the benefit of the doubt. So, in preparation, step number 1 for confrontation, what are the 3 steps we need to take? Number 1, what do I want to achieve? Number 2, is it worth bringing up the issue? And number 3, why would a reasonable person act that way? Now, before I move on to step number 2, we're going to actually get into the confrontation. But before I do it, I want to ask, are there any questions? Remember, we're trying to make this a dialogue. Are there any questions? Anything that is everything so clear so far? Is this making sense? Yes? Any questions? Okay. Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 and 25. Matthew 5:23. Chapter 5, verse 23 and 25. Yes, please.
Thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath fought against thee. Leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift.
Thank you. Imagine you are a scuba diver. And while you're diving, a 14-foot white shark comes straight at you. What would you do? That's the exact question that was posed to Andy Casagrande. He was a cameraman responsible for the harrowing and death-defying pictures of aggressive and large white sharks. And his surprising answer was that we must do something completely unexpected. Take your camera and swim directly towards the shark. Yes, swim towards the shark, not away from him. He says, swimming towards the shark creates a defensive instinct in the shark. He says, the reality is, if you don't act like prey, they won't treat you like prey. The same thing applies to confrontation. The first thing you need to do is to take the initiative and go head on. Go to the person as soon as possible. Don't run away from confrontation. If you determine in step number 1 that the confrontation is necessary, then go for it. Choose an appropriate time and place to chat in private and go for it head on. That means taking the initiative. We read in Matthew 18:15 that if the other person is offended by me, I must go. Here in Matthew 5:23, we just read that if the other person has something against me because I offended him, then I must go. It doesn't matter who started it. If I see something that is getting between me and my brother, I must take the initiative and go. Every time, no exceptions. The responsibility of going is mine. I need to go, no matter who started it. And not only must I take the initiative and go, but I must do so as soon as possible. It says in Matthew 5:25, go agree with your adversary quickly. Now listen to this story. And this is a true story. In a hospital, a woman was checked in for a tonsillectomy. They would take out her tonsils. But when she woke up, they discovered they had removed 3/4 of her right foot. What? She goes in for a tonsillectomy and ends up with an amputated foot? What happened? Of course, she was hysterical. The hospital administration immediately ran a thorough investigation to find out why this horrific mistake was made. They interviewed everyone that had to do with the patient from check-in all the way to recovery. And they discovered that there were at least 7 people that saw the discrepancy, but they said nothing. Including the instrument technician who was going down the list of all the instruments that he had to put in the tray, and he comes to a bone saw. A bone saw? Why do I need a bone saw for a tonsillectomy? Must have been some tonsils. But anyway, not my call. And he puts the saw on in the tray. And the investigation uncovered that the hospital had unintentionally created a culture of silence. The unwritten rule was never question a doctor. Now, let me address my fellow ministers for a second. No issue can be dealt with and solved until it is brought out on the open. Our challenge as ministers, I'm speaking to myself also, our challenge as leaders is to create an environment in the church where it is safe to bring up problems quickly. I read an interesting quote, and this is based on 30 years of research, that says, the health of any relationship, team, organization is a function of the lag time between identifying a problem and discussing it. Let me repeat that. The health of any relationship, team, organization is a function of the lag time between identifying a problem and discussing it. Our jobs as leaders is to make that lag time as short as possible. That as soon as problems are detected, they might be brought up without fear. And that's our responsibility as leaders. You see, being able to speak up when a problem is detected is a major marker between healthy and unhealthy organizations. The same is true for the church. I tell my congregation all the time, I want you to be free to call me up on anything you see in me. If I deal with it wrong, it's my problem with God. If you don't bring it up, it's going to be your problem with God. So bring it up. And the same is true for all of us, ministers or not. If we see something that needs to be dealt with, don't beat around the bush. The first thing you need to do is to bring it up, and to bring it up as soon as possible. Amen. Galatians 6:1, please. Galatians 6:1.
Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness.
A spirit of meekness or gentleness.
Amen.
The second thing you need to do when you in a confrontation is to make it safe. I remember once we were in a ministers' meeting in Panama, and a brother who I appreciate very much and respect brought up an issue. But I felt personally attacked, so I became defensive, really defensive. And the issue escalated to a point in which we were locked on opposite sides of a stalemate. I mean, we were on opposite sides of a stalemate. And then something unusual happened. One of the other ministers requested that I leave the room for a few minutes. And frankly, I was happy to do so, because this wasn't going nowhere. I never knew what they discussed when I was gone. But when I came back, the brother who had confronted me or told me something humbly apologized and suggested that we pray. And we did so, and as we got up from prayer, I extended my hand in a friendly gesture, and as we embraced, I just melted in his arms, and I started crying. And the issue was solved instantly. You see, and by the way, my respect for the brother increased tenfold. You see, people never, listen to this please, people never become defensive about what you are saying. They become defensive of what they think or they believe you are. Well, let me say that. Let me get my words. I'm tripping over myself. People never become defensive about what you're saying. They become defensive because of why they think you're saying it. That's why your intent, not your content, that provokes defensiveness. That's why step number 1, preparation, is so important. It's so crucial. If you come with 2 stones in your hand, the other person is going to lift up their guard. They'll become defensive and they won't listen to a word you say. But if you can create safety and the other person sees that you're not attacking her, but you want to solve the issue, then your chances of solving the issue will go dramatically up. At the foundation of every successful accountability discussion lies safety. If you can create safety, you can talk about almost anything with almost anyone. Now, you might be asking, so how do I do this? How do I create that safe environment? How can I speak the truth in love without the whole thing blowing up in my face and the other person becoming defensive, sad, or angry? One way is to start your conversation by expressing that, exactly that. For example, 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with my eldest son. He's an adult now. And we had a discussion the night before, and he got really mad at me. So I let the whole day pass, the following day, the whole day pass. Let him calm down. And then I approached him and I said, son, I need to talk to you about what happened last night. But honestly, I'm worried because I care about you. And I care about this issue. And I'm not sure how I can deal with this in a way that will be safe for anyone. Can you help me? Because I really want this to go well. So I was sincere about what was my intent. So he immediately lowered down his guard, and we were able to communicate. And the whole issue went okay. We were able to work things out. You see, being vulnerable and transparent about your concerns is one of the most powerful ways to communicate intent. The third thing you want to do during a confrontation is to describe the gap. The gap is simply the difference between the performance that is expected and the actual delivery of performance. In the parable of the barren fig tree in Luke 13, verse 6, Jesus gives a very simple illustration of what the gap is. He said, a man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but didn't find anything. So what was he expecting? Fruit. What did he get? Nothing. So there's a gap between what was expected and what was in reality. So how do you describe the gap during a confrontation? You start by stating the facts, just the facts, what you saw, nothing else. And then you share your concern about what you saw. And then you end by letting the person express his point of view. For example, hey, pastor, and notice this can be applied for any level of confrontation. You're talking about maybe somebody who is a direct report, somebody who reports to you, or it could be a peer, or it could be somebody who you report to, somebody who is above you in some kind of hierarchy. Hey, pastor, I've noticed a pattern where at the end of a lot of our monthly meetings, you specifically ask for additional thoughts from most of the brothers, but not from the sisters. I'm just concerned that you might be excluding the input of some of the members of our church and send the message that we don't value them. Can you help me understand how you see the situation? Can you see the politeness in the confrontation? He's bringing up the issue, stating the facts, what he has observed, his concern about it, and then giving the other person the opportunity to speak up. Simple. And from there on, listen, and I mean really listen to what the other person is saying. And then based on the feedback, discuss what needs to happen next. And then you make sure you finish on a positive and encouraging note. Like, for example, I'm glad I really had this talk with you. Now I understand where the problem is. So, that's what you do during the confrontation. First, you take the initiative and go. You make it safe for the other person to open up, and then you describe the gap. Before we move on to our third and final step, I want to pause and ask, Are there any questions? Is this making sense? Yes?
Brother, let me speak. Would you mind? There is this issue that's been bugging me all of this time.
Let me get closer. I want to make sure I get the question. Yes, go ahead.
Here in America,
You're in America?
without any recommendation of other people, you cannot go by, you cannot be able to function as it is.
As a what?
I cannot function as it is because somebody had to have a recommendation. Who am I? I was not born here in the United States. And so my condition in life and all of the things that's going on, I'm having a difficulty coping up what the American lifestyle is. And in so doing, it just made it all up. And so doing, my family is seeing a negative response out of me that you are not a qualified guy. You are nothing. And in so doing, even in the business world, I have learned the situation without a recommendation of other people. I can't be able to use their business because I have to have a recommendation who that company was in order that I can be able to let him participate in my construction business bid. And so how do you approach all of this? And what happened last few weeks ago, and after we had fasted all of that time, and I pray that the Lord will help and send a good thing on this camp meeting. Immediately after that, and it says, I hope that there's no agent into this into the camp. And well, so the next returning back to Springfield where I work, so doing. And I said unto the people, I overheard our pastor say, I am an agent of the church. And so doing, it really hurt me. I am trying to do my best in order, and I believe this gospel all of these years, and the Lord is helping me through all of this. And then I was hurt, and then for all of our conversation, Libby was there. Oh man, I'm sorry. It will be spread out. And what I had said to my coworker, no, you are not an agent. We have seen your life all of these years working with the company. And so you need to spread out and this and that one. So I apologize once again for all of the behavior and things that I had with the church. But if I have done wrong, forgive me. It is not my desire to be a cause trouble to my family and to the whole church, because my life is in the church. I got American missionary came by and gave her life to the gospel, and that's where I got saved. And I am not ashamed that I got converted under the missionary of Sister Virginia Hart. I am very thankful that I'm still saved. And how can you confront all of the things that without recommendation you can't do anything?
I'm not sure I got the question, but I understand that you have a situation where you face, because of your not being a native, you face the issue of people not accepting you because you don't have a recommendation. Did I understand that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so have you faced that within the context of the church?
I'm just bringing out this because it all came up into the message, and that message is for me, brother.
Okay, all right.
Don't be upset with
Well,
me.
no, I'm not upset at all. My challenge to you, my brother, would be that if at any time you would see perceive that you could just openly state it and say, brother, is the fact that I am a native an issue between you and me? To have the courage to bring it up, politely but firmly. That's what my challenge would be for you. Make sense? Did I answer your question, my brother? I want to make sure you get what you asked. Okay. Feel free to come contact me after service if you want. Any other question? Yes.
I know you said that if you should deal with issues quickly.
Yes.
All right.
Right.
Right. But suppose that you and I were in a situation, home or whatever, in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw you studying for a message
Mhm.
that said, I see you're a pastor and you need quiet time to study. But before you started studying, you might have done something or you forgot to do something or whatever that affects me directly.
Mm-hmm.
And my desire is to approach you to clear the air. However, I'm thinking, but if I talk to him now, it might cut his trend of studying or whatever, and I don't want to distract him with something that is not life shattering.
So can you wait until after the message?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So suppose you were studying for this message for not just to preach, but it would take a lot more time to study. You know, not just a day or whatever, but sometime.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that if I don't approach it now, and I do it later on, a month or so later, when I feel you're in a better frame of mind, you might say, why you waited so long? Why didn't you tell me? So how will you approach a situation like that? My thought is not to distract you with what you're doing, because I know you're busy, and I don't want to draw your mind away from what you're doing.
Okay.
But at the same time, by me waiting to the most appropriate time, your defense might be, what if it was so important, or if it was so bad? Why didn't you say it?
Okay. Maybe one way to be able to approach it would be like, you could say, brother so-and-so, I have something that is nagging me, that's on my heart. Is now an appropriate time to deal with it? And you put the onus on him. You let him decide if now is a good time or not. But you approach it. Don't leave it hanging in the air indefinitely, because all the while you're affected. In your spirit, you're affected. And he's preaching and you're like, So it's affecting your spirit. So you can approach the person and say, and ask the question, the pastor or brother, is this an appropriate time to be in position? And you get that off your shoulders, you did your part, and he can decide whether it is appropriate or not. And then he can't later on tell you, no, why did you do that? I did. You did your part. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I appreciate the questions. I'm trying to make this as possible, as useful for you in your situation. Okay, so we've had step number 1, preparation, what to do before the meeting. Step number 2, what to do during the meeting. And now we move on to step number 3, what to do after the confrontation. Luke 17:3, please. Luke 17, verse 3.
There was a widow in that city. She came unto him saying, avenge me of mine adversary.
Take heed to yourselves, if thy brother trespass against thee, rebuke him, and if he repent, forgive him.
And if he repents, forgive him. Once you have confronted and dealt with the issue, let it go. Don't dwell on it. Let it go. It is best for you it is best for him. Let the issue go. Don't dwell on it. Now, you might be wondering, okay, it says there, if he repents, what happens if he doesn't repent? Or it is a feigned fingido. It is a feigned repentance. I mean, but the issue pops up again. And the conduct has not changed. What do you do then? Then what we have then is an issue that needs to be followed up. And that's another skill that we don't have time to look into today. And that can happen. Yes, it happens. But let me tell you something. Right now, for now, I would suggest, if you're one of those like me that have issues or problems beginning confrontations, start with this first. Learning to initiate confrontations. I guarantee that 9 out of 10 times the problems are solved if you come appropriately. Yes, there will be people who are difficult. Yes, there will be people who are stubborn. Yes, there will be people who do not want to cooperate. Yes, but that's usually, if you're talking about a good, reasonable person, the issue will be solved. So begin with that. And the other skills of handling to follow confrontation, which it has to be done, and the Bible has principles to do that, you can handle later on, but begin with this. I want to wrap up our discussion with a story that Brother Katong told us about something that happened to him when he was learning to drive. He said that when he was trying to move the car, it behaved strangely. No matter how much he put the foot on the pedal, it would just jump and stutter and stall out, and a lot of smoke. And he couldn't understand what was going on until somebody who was passing by said, "Release the handbrake, boy." If this message accomplishes only one thing, I hope it spurs you to release the handbrake that is holding you back from having that crucial confrontation. My prayer for you is that you might get over the fear of initiating confrontations, and that you learn to navigate it with empathy. My desire is to nudge you, not to avoid conflict, but to handle it head on. Ignore that voice that is telling you to shut up and just give in. And ignore the other voice that is telling you to lash back. Remember, wherever there are 2 or more people living together, interpersonal problems will emerge. Conflict will occur, even in the church. It's not a matter of if, but when. The idea is not to avoid it, but to go at it head on. Because when it is done, and it is done well, the issue is solved, the relationship is strengthened. That's what you want. The issue is solved, the relationship is strengthened. Always remember that the enemy is the situation, not the other person. And you want to go hard on the issue, soft on the person. To do that, remember the 3 steps. Before the confrontation, deal with your own issues first. Take your plank out of your own eye first and ask the 3 questions. Why do I want to achieve this? What do I want to achieve? Is it really worth bringing up the issue? Why would a reasonable person act like that? Step number 2, during the confrontation, take the initiative and go to your brother as soon as possible. Make it safe for the other person to open up. Begin by describing the gap. And after the confrontation, forgive and move on. Don't dwell on the issue. Now, Church of God, look at me. Give me your attention, please. Information never brings transformation. Just knowing something.
Repeat that, please. I'm sorry.
I'll repeat that. Information never brings about transformation. Just knowing something is not going to create blessings or change. You need to act upon it. Brother Brewster usually finishes his messages with the phrase, "If you know these things, blessed are ye if you do them." So the blessing is in the doing. You won't do it perfectly the first time. Do it anyway. You can start by applying this at home with your spouse and your children, at school or at work, friends and neighbors, but by all means, do it within the church.
All right.
It might not be sure. It might not be easy, but rest assured, it will be worth it. More than a little research has shown that genuine, honest conflict between people over goals actually energizes the problem-solving process in a collaborative way. If this is true for the church in general, how much more if this is true for the organizations in general, how much more for the church, for which Jesus Christ died and prayed for? If there's one thing we can be sure of, is that it's God's will for us is the unity of his people. We can absolutely be sure of that. He gave us the principles of his word to show us how to do it. Jesus prayed for it. Jesus modeled it. Jesus died to enable it. And he gave us his spirit to empower us to do it. We can rest assured that every effort, every sincere effort to maintain unity, he will back it up. I'm sure that all of you are, as I am, sick and tired of hearing so much strife and division happening among the movement we know as Church of God. I, Wesley Jones, I have decided I will not be part of the problem, I will be part of the solution. And I honestly believe with all my heart that if we practice these principles, we will be part of the solution. So church, let's do it. Let's have those crucial confrontations. Help us to hold one another accountable. Amen, saints? Yeah. Thank you, and God bless.